This week's reading from 2 Kings reminded me of a book whose title and author inspired millions of Americans when it was issued. It was published in 1956 in the midst of the Cold War. Suspicion and fear governed in international relations. Congressional committees held hearings to ferret out supposed communist subversives in the government, academia, and the arts. The great powers on either side of the Iron Curtain were busily building up their stockpiles of nuclear weapons under a theory of deterrence, ironically dubbed mutually assured destruction, MAD. Meanwhile, and I remember this, American school children were practicing duck and cover drills in preparation for the nuclear attack many believed was inevitable. America's post-war economy was booming, creating a burgeoning middle class, but cultural conformism was growing as well. It was the decade of the man in the gray flannel suit. After World War II, American men and women returned to pre-war roles. Men out of uniforms and back into factories and offices, women out of factories and offices and back into the kitchen. And in the 1950s, the civil rights movement was gaining momentum, forcing the nation to confront its racial injustices. So in a decade of rising international tensions, rapid growth at home, and profound societal changes, this book was a reminder to American citizens of the power that moral courage and political idealism have to advance the common good. The author wrote the book as a call for a renewal of political faith. He also meant it to encourage the nation's elected representatives not to yield to the dictates of special interest groups or to make holding on to their offices their highest priority. The book told the story of 8 United States senators from across the Republic's history who had put principle above party and idealism above political expediency. It illustrated how the political visions of those men, which they often held at great personal cost, had ennobled the political process and advanced the American ideal. The author said, "This is a book about the most admirable of human virtues, courage." The author was the junior senator for Massachusetts, whose own courage and idealism would come to inspire a generation. And John F. Kennedy entitled his book, Profiles in Courage. I was reminded of that title when I reread the story of the ancient Hebrew prophet Elijah and his disciple Elisha. So great was the impact of these 2 courageous early prophets upon the imagination of the Jewish people that the stories about them that have come down to us are embroidered with elements of legend. But at their core, they are stories of great moral and spiritual courage against great odds. Now, Elijah may get the greater glory, but Elisha's particular brand of courage also has much to teach us. Elisha was a man who demonstrated a special kind of courage when it counted most. Elijah and Elisha lived 900 years before Jesus. Political division, moral decline, and spiritual corruption marked their age. The once unified kingdom of David and Solomon had split into 2 rival kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And things had gone downhill from there, particularly in the northern kingdom, Israel. Israel's kings, for the most part, had a penchant for political intrigue, foolish alliances, and most especially for spiritual infidelity. In such a perilous era, Elijah had answered a call from God to speak judgment and warning to the unfaithful rulers of his day, King Ahab and his wife Jezebel. Ahab and his foreign-born queen had forsaken the first and greatest commandment, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Ahab had erected altars to the gods of Jezebel's people in his capital city and created a cult of priests to encourage the worship of the fertility god Baal among the Jewish people. Calling out Ahab and Jezebel for their apostasy fell to Elijah. Elijah evidently did his job very well, for Ahab nicknamed the prophet the troubler of Israel. We probably remember Elijah best for his dramatic showdown with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel and the vengeance Jezebel swore against him when he defeated them. We remember how, in fear for his life, Elijah had fled and hid in the cave until he heard the still small voice of God telling him to go on his way and continue his work. Along the way, the old prophet Elijah enlisted the help of the young man Elisha. Elisha proved to be a man of great fidelity to his master Elijah, and above all, fidelity to the God who had called them both. A better term than fidelity might be stubbornness. Now, you won't likely find stubbornness on any list of personal virtues, but in Elisha's case, it was an element of his spiritual courage. As we heard in our first reading this morning, Elijah's journey was about to reach its climax. He was about to be taken from Elisha. 3 times, Elijah urged Elisha to turn back, to go with him no farther. Elisha would have none of it. He said to Elijah, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." Elisha refused to be turned away from whatever awaited his master or himself. His stubborn perseverance calls to mind a line from an old African-American gospel song, "I believe I'll run on and see what the end's going to be." In the face of adversity, I believe I'll run on and see what the end's going to be. In the face of uncertainty, I believe I'll run on and see what the end's going to be. Elisha said to Elijah, in effect, "God has brought me this far with you. I believe I'll run on and see what the end's going to be." Spiritual courage like that has an element of stubborn fidelity. You see it in the courage demonstrated in loyalty to a friendship when times are hard, or in faithfulness to God's calling, come what may. Our own time seems so characterized by transient relationships and conditional loyalties. We build escape clauses into everything from business contracts to marriage vows. If things get rough, no matter, you can just walk away. But spiritual courage says the road we've walked together counts for something. The work we've shared matters. I mean to see it through. As the Lord lives and as you live, Elisha said, I will not leave you. So when old Elijah realizes that he can't dissuade his young apprentice, he turns to him and says, ask what I shall do for you. In other words, what is it you want, Elisha? I'm about to be taken from you forever. What do you want from me? How a person answers that question in such a moment is a measure of his character. Elisha says, let me inherit a double share of your spirit. And that phrase, a double share, is the Hebrew idiom an eldest son used when he asked his father for his inheritance. On Elisha's lips, it meant, let your work be my work, your calling, my calling. Let the power of God that has worked through you now work through me. Elisha asked this, knowing full well the rigors that Elijah had endured. Elijah had been threatened, chased into exile, and driven almost to despair. Elisha knew this, but he still said to Elijah, give me a double share of your spirit. He did not ask for safety or ease, but for more power to do the work of God. Courageous. You have asked a hard thing, says old Elijah, but if you can see me as I am taken from you, it shall be so. And here the biblical narrative takes on the character of poetry. As they walk along, Elisha suddenly sees fiery heavenly emissaries pass between him and Elijah. As Elijah is taken up by the wind of God, Elisha cries out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." It is one of the great dramatic cries in all of the Bible. Elisha's courageous prayer for power to do the work of God is answered in the affirmative. His courage in asking for a greater measure of God's Spirit is rewarded. Elisha sees the chariots of fire. He is given to see unseen realities behind the world of common experience. He is given to see the invisible workings of God for a moment made visible to his eyes. He is given insight to see that God is not absent, though ordinary eyes might fail to see him. When we courageously ask for a greater measure of the Spirit, that courage in asking is answered with sharper spiritual vision. We more and more gain eyes to see what others may not see, to see power at work where others see only confusion, to see paths forward where others see only barriers. When the chariots depart and the fiery light of heaven subsided to ordinary day, the story goes that Elisha bent down and took up the mantle, the cloak, which had fallen from Elijah's shoulders. He carried it to the river Jordan. He called upon God and struck the water with the cloak, as Elijah had done before him, and walked across the Jordan on dry land. On the far side, a company of young prophets were watching him. When they saw it, they cried out, "The spirit of Elijah rests upon Elisha." And from that day forward, Elisha would carry on Elijah's work, God's work. He too would speak truth to those in high places and become an instrument of God's healing power. Our nation and our world need men and women with Elisha's kind of spiritual courage today more than ever. Someone must speak inconvenient truths to those in power who make war and foster injustice and despoil the natural world. Our world has more than enough of ideological myopia and blind fanaticism. These are rooted in fear, not courage. We need people of true courage and spiritual discernment now more than ever. The church everywhere needs men and women of true courage who will make no peace with oppression or substitute political dogma, right or left, for the gospel. We need people of faith with the courage to examine their own lives in the light of the gospel, and to have the courage not simply to write off those within the body of Christ with whom they disagree. We need people of faith with the courage to pray as Elisha prayed, "Give us a double measure of your Spirit." We need that kind of people. We need to be that kind of people. God can give us eyes to see the chariots of fire, to see the unseen hand of God at work, and to join in God's work. God can give us eyes to see our way through controversies and conflicts in the Spirit of Jesus. God can give us eyes to see beyond the discouragement or fear we may feel in these challenging times, and give us the courage to hope and work and pray. Elijah and Elisha were men of extraordinary value, and you and I may never be called upon to demonstrate courage through great heroic acts. But we can practice a kind of everyday courage that comes down to some pretty basic things. We can build up the world's stockpiles of grace and goodwill through daily deeds of kindness and generosity in our me first world. We can use our votes and voices to make our society safer so that this generation of school children can stand up and look up in hope, not duck and cover in fear. We can speak up for every person's right to be who they are and not to be bullied, shamed, or erased. We can acknowledge the injustices and injuries of our nation's past and the lingering scars of prejudice, and we can work to build a more just and loving society. And especially now, we can stand against every calculated curtailment of human rights and the liberty of conscience. Above all, our courage can be the courage which refuses to believe that love, the love of God, cannot prevail. Our courage will inspire others, and we can pray no more courageous prayer than this, that God will give us wisdom to see and power to act, so that we too may be profiles in courage. Amen.